Kevin Pelton, ESPN NBA Insider, going to join us in just a second. He's going to talk about the trade deadline, and maybe he can give us a little insight on what's wrong with this Sixers team. Although I'm sure he's laughing right now saying everybody wants to know what's wrong with this Sixers team. But maybe, as I say all the time, I think we complicate things in sports, all sports, not just the NBA, way too much. I think we're trying to dig. And there's probably a simple answer as to what could be wrong with this team.
You think? With this team?
Let's bring in Kevin Pelton and ask him. ESPN's Kevin Pelton joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Are we overthinking the Sixers' issues? Is it simple? Is it deeper than we're trying to make out here? When you see the Sixers, Kevin, welcome back, pal. What do you see with this team?
I guess it was maybe more of a shoulder shrug than it was a laugh because, I mean, to some extent, I think, what they're going through was kind of predictable. I was not really with the extreme hype about the Sixers last summer as they were putting together this roster. I had, I think some concerns that have played out in terms of, obviously their size is a big factor at the defensive end. We saw it last year in the playoffs. We saw it against Milwaukee on Christmas Day, the way that they can make life very difficult for opponents, but it also makes things very difficult for them at times at the offensive end. And, the fit of Horford, Embiid, and Simmons is a trio, I think is a legitimate question mark and, probably not something you were going to address at this year's trade deadline. I mean, I think the one bummer about it is I don't know that I lay a lot of these issues at Brett Brown's feet, and it seems very likely that the way things are headed, he's going to be the scapegoat.
That's an interesting comment because I think a lot of people listening, not me, but a lot of people listening would completely disagree with you. They want him gone 2 years ago. But why do you say that the coach, this isn't at his feet? Because I'm interested to hear your reasoning. You've been a guy who's worked in, with some NBA teams and follow the league regularly. I say all the time, the coach is a lot lower on my list of reasons why a team struggles. It's a star league. It's a player-driven league. I blame the players more so than the coach. But what is it about what's going on here that you're not also saying, hey, the coach has something – he probably has some blame, but why do you feel that it's, not particularly him like the fans do?
Right. And I mean, I'm not saying that it would necessarily be a mistake depending who they bring in. I just don't think I would start there because I don't know what coach you're going to bring in that's going to resolve the fact that you have – Joel Embiid, who is best in the post. You have Ben Simmons, who is best with the ball in his hands, probably, or running pick and roll as the roll man, which is, something else that Embiid kind of complicates. And then you bring in another big, even though Horford can shoot it and is effective in that role. And it just, there's a duplication of skills. There's not the spacing you would like around Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. I mean, I just don't think that a coaching change is going to solve those issues, even if, maybe you can get a more consistent level of effort, that sort of thing at the defensive end of the court. I think the other thing is, probably whatever's going on, a lot of it gets attributed to the fact that the Sixers are so good at home and so bad on the road. But historically, if you look at it, that's not a thing that's actually a meaningful, there's not some teams that are good at home and bad on the road other than, the Nuggets because of the fact that they play at altitude. It's just a fluky thing that happens because, we split things up that way.
Kevin, as you outline the, individual talents of the personnel on the roster, I agree with you, and that's why I'm starting to look more and more, with the benefit of hindsight, at Elton Brand. And is he someone that's fair to criticize right now?
I think he is. I mean, look, we see the vision for what he was laying out here, and it has worked out at times. Again, you go back to last year's playoffs and how close this team was to, get into the Eastern Conference Finals, and who knows what it would have happened there. Although, I don't think you can take for granted that they would have beaten Milwaukee just because of the fact that Toronto did. And, then they kind of doubled down on that this offseason in terms of bringing in Horford and replacing J.J. Redick with Josh Richardson, and now all of a sudden you've got everyone in the starting lineup is 6'5" or bigger, and even more defensive size and versatility. But that came at the cost of losing your best shooter offensively, someone that teams really had to fear from 3-point range. And even though Horford and Josh Richardson are both good shooters, you don't have that knockdown guy that that has the total gravity that you can't help off of anymore.
What do you think's wrong with Embiid? Because we talked about it. Obviously, we talk about it all the time for years, but the injuries, and that's number one, and a lot of that is not in his control, but it just seems like there's mental injuries as well when you talk about Embiid.
Yeah, it's tough to say. The last couple of games have obviously been really rough for him. Probably more of a surprise, I guess I would say, against Boston, since they don't have that classic size in the front court, than against Brook Lopez in Milwaukee, which can cause him some problems. And also seems like, looking at some of his quotes lately, like he's feeling this tension about what the Sixers are doing offensively and feeling compelled to, play on the perimeter, despite the fact that, that probably doesn't play to his strengths, just because of the fact that that might be what's best for this group as a whole.
We're talking with Kevin Pelton, ESPN NBA insider here. So with all this said, they did make a trade yesterday. How do you feel Alec Burks and Glenn Robinson III fit into this clunky roster?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be saviors and come in and change everything, especially because the starting lineup's going to stay the same. But they definitely fit and they definitely help. I mean, I think there was a lot of interest in, Derrick Rose perhaps for Philadelphia. And if you look at what Burks has done this season in Golden State, it's actually quite similar to what Rose has done in Detroit. The one difference being, he's not quite as dynamic an on-ball playmaker as Derrick Rose is out of the pick and roll, but, he's been as valuable because of the fact that he's also an above-average three-point shooter, someone who you can play off the ball if he's playing with Ben Simmons or if Josh Richardson is running pick and roll in situations like that, and you still have to respect him and guard him. And then Glenn Robinson III, a solid upgrade on what they were getting from James Ennis in that spot in terms of he's a better three-point shooter and I think a little bit bigger, more physical defender. So I like what they did, especially because the cost was so low in terms of second-round picks that are going to come late in the round. But it does seem, one of the things I would have liked maybe if I were the Sixers is to turn some of the quantity on the bench, because there's just been a lot of wing options for Brett Brown to sort through, into quality, and that they didn't really do. Now you've even kind of doubled down on quantity.
Yeah, so much talk here, Kevin, is, this was a roster built for the playoffs. They got all this size, the half-court game, they're going to defend you, they're going to make the game ugly. There's teams in all sports that you're like, man, that was a good regular season team. They get to the playoffs, and it's a different game. We've seen it with, the Hawks, the Bucks last year. Are the Sixers the reverse? A team that will struggle in the 82-game slate, but playoff time, you like their roster better?
I think so. I mean, number one, they are still a top-heavy team in terms of, there's a split in terms of value between their starting lineup and everybody else. Number two, the fact that, Embiid has a tendency to miss time. You're going to want to limit his minutes over the course of the regular season. Those become less issues in the playoffs. Hopefully it doesn't deal with, the illness that limited him in that Philadelphia series, in the Toronto series last year. So I think those are reasons to believe. And then, just kind of when they're extremely motivated and locked in at the defensive end of the court, the size that they put out there, I think, does become more of an issue. And we saw that for the Raptors in that series, where Fred VanVleet, who goes on to, play a crucial role for them in the NBA Finals, and now is playing at a level where I thought he probably should have been on the fringe of the All-Star discussion this year. You couldn't even play him in that series against Philadelphia because he was so unnerved by their size. So, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But, certainly I think you would have felt better about that if you're the Sixers, if, okay, that means, we're 10 games back of Milwaukee in the standings, but we're still looking at the second or third seed, as opposed to, a situation where it's quite possible now that they're going to have to go on the road starting in the first round because of the fact that this middle tier of the East has been stronger than I think anyone expected.
And that's kind of what I was going to get into with you next, Kevin, which is if you have to make a prediction now with a lot of talk and hype on Miami, especially after acquiring Andre Iguodala, does that make Miami that much better in your mind? And where do you see Philadelphia ending up, I guess, when it's all said and done?
It'll be interesting because I think Iguodala, along the same lines of what we were just saying about the Sixers, is one of those moves that's going to help the Heat much more in the playoffs than it is the rest of the regular season. Obviously he hasn't played in an NBA game since Game 6 of last year's NBA Finals. He's going to have to work off the rust, get back into shape on the fly for the Heat here. So, I don't know if he's going to make a dramatic difference in terms of where they finish in the standings, but then help them more in the playoffs. But, still I think at this point you'd see them as favored to finish ahead of Philadelphia. I mean, I feel like fifth is probably the most likely single outcome for the Sixers at this point.
If there's something that you watch this team, from night to night, and you see the Sixers that you think they can tweak with the roster as assembled, what is something you would like to see them maybe kind of tweak a little bit?
Something they've started, it feels like, to do more in the last couple of weeks since Embiid was out of the lineup is, find ways to run and push the ball with Ben Simmons anyway. Kind of use him as the trailer. The classic example of this, everyone cites, obviously, is the Showtime Lakers, where you'd try to score in transition with Magic Johnson pushing the break, and Byron Scott and James Worthy flying up the wings alongside him, and then if that doesn't work, now let's settle in and find Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in the post. And that kind of philosophy is definitely something I would like to push as much as possible, because Simmons is such a different threat in transition than he is in the half-court game.
Do you have any anticipation that his offensive game will evolve anymore over the years, or is this who he is, in your opinion?
I think it's very rare that a 23-year-old or 22 or whatever he is at this point is who he is. I think the decision-making certainly will improve, if nothing else. The fact that he still has been unwilling to try jumpers in games, despite working it in the practice setting, suggests to me that, maybe it's a little something more than just a skill development issue. So maybe that isn't going to come around. But, I do think that he will continue to, improve his vision, his understanding of the other the other 9 players on the court, that sort of thing. I think that will continue to evolve.
Okay, what has a better shot of happening, a first-round exit or a finals appearance?
I'd say a first-round exit if you choose between those. Now, if you make it first-round exit and conference finals appearance, then I start to have a tougher time with it.
Which way would you lean there?
I would probably still lean first-round exit. Ooh. Because home court advantage is an important thing in the postseason.
Yep, and their road struggles are certainly there. Kevin Pelton at K Pelton on Twitter, ESPN NBA insider. He likes the Sixers deal, just not enough to potentially get him out of the first round, or at least move up the seedings. Right now they're 6, maybe move up to 5. We'll see. It's a clump mess in there, although Toronto's starting to hold on to 2 pretty good. Kevin, always a pleasure, pal.
All right, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Kevin Pelton, like all guests, appear to be the Boardwalk Honda Hotline.